Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Britton's Hangout Hour, episode 80. I can't believe we're here, guys. And I'm here with returning guest Raf from Raf Blutaxt. How you doing, man? Do the thing.
I'm doing good so far.
There we go.
Cheers.
Yeah. So, yeah, you just recently made your glorious return to YouTube.
Yeah. Well, I mean, glorious is up for debate, but at least I'm finally back recording stuff. I finally found a solution for my technical problems.
Fair enough. Fair enough. But yeah, no, but yeah, you're back on YouTube. You were gone for a little bit because you were doing stuff.
No, it was mostly my main issue was that my camera broke. I had no alternative for recording for a while, and I needed to figure out what to do. Because as we all know, cameras are kind of expensive, right? Not something we can just afford on the fly. So it took me a while to get that sorted. And during that time, I did, in fact, spend some time in different countries doing different things like heavy metal stuff and history stuff and literature stuff and just stuff.
So a lot of stuff I see.
My entire life is basically just stuff happening one after the other.
You also just recently talked to Jared on his
Yeah, I
channel.
did.
I saw that a little bit, even though I haven't read the book
Yeah,
you guys
because
were
like my,
talking
my
about.
webcam still worked. I just needed to figure out a way to record with my webcam that actually worked because my computer's really old, so recording on my computer kind of doesn't work really well, and kind of completely fucked up the frame rate. So it was a bit of a struggle, but I think I've got it in hand now. So yeah,
Didn't you say you
I
like
even
you're
recorded the
recording
video
on
today.
Zoom now?
Currently, I'm recording stuff on Zoom, which feels wrong in so many ways, but it's the one thing that kind of works. So that's what we're doing until I find a way to do something better.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah.
So yeah, you've been doing a couple of pet projects this year. You've been calling out booktubers when you feel like it, and studying Mormonism. That's an interesting one.
Yeah. I mean, I don't necessarily. I wouldn't call it like calling out booktubers because like the
I
call
know
out thing.
I'm being facetious.
Yeah. But when you look on YouTube, there's a lot of like this weird call out culture and like, hey, you're a bad person or whatever. It's like, I'm not doing that, but like if I disagree with someone's take, then you know,
Okay, you're calling out bad takes. How's that?
yes, I'm a person that likes to disagree with people, and yeah, I feel like adding different perspectives kind of adds to the conversation. And everyone's obviously always welcome to just disagree with me violently and in videos and whatnot. I'm always open for debate, but I think it kind of helps if we actually discuss stuff and have opposing views compared to just like everyone just sitting in a circle going like, wow, this was really cool. Now go and watch my new book haul. I don't know.
Yeah, your book haul would just be you like pulling up your phone and being like, "Oh, look at all this Audible stuff I got." Or do you not
Yeah,
even do
yeah.
that? You're on the full like physical audiobooks.
I do have some old school physical audiobooks back when that was like the only way to do stuff. It's like, should I ever do something about Song of Ice and Fire? I will pull out my old school Game of Thrones massive block of CDs, like 30 something CDs.
Not bad, not bad.
Those were the days, man. Now, actually, obviously downloads in that regard are so much easier to handle than huge piles of CDs
Yeah, no, I've only listened to a
or
couple.
tapes.
I've only listened to a couple of audiobooks, like First Law, because Stephen Pacey is fantastic. Um,
Yeah,
you listened to the First Law audiobooks, didn't you? Because
I did listen to the first Law audiobooks. Yes.
oh, okay, that, I don't want to. Do you mind talking about that? You're blind.
No. Of course not.
Oh, okay.
Totally fine.
So I'm only because like you mention it, and I'm like, I try to be,
No, it's
I try to have
totally
some
fine.
tact on this show, Raf. Like at least sometimes.
Yeah. So no, I don't mind talking about it. And yes, I've listened to the First Law audiobooks
Oh, that was
years
probably a
ago.
silly question to ask then.
Actually, I remember the first time I read them, the First Law books back in the days. They were not yet available in audio, so I did something highly illegal, which was pirate an ebook copy and have my screen reader read it to me. And trust me, you don't want to do that. It's not a good experience.
Yeah, I recently was talking to Adrian Gibson, who
Mhm.
wrote Mushroom Blues, which sounds right up my alley. It's a sci-fi crime procedural. I'm down for that. And
Yeah,
he gave me the ebook version of his book, and
yeah,
I don't know why. Maybe I'm just like a hipster, or I'm not really. I have a hard time with like ebooks.
yeah.
I read Andrew Meredith's thrice because he very generously gave me an ebook, and
Mm.
yeah, I was kind of like, well, this is kind of weird. I was reading it on my phone the whole time, so that was just kind of it's a weird experience, but
Yeah, I mean, that's like one of those things, like the medium does in fact matter. And it makes a difference whether you read a book in, say, hardcover, whether you read it in paperback, whether you read it on an ebook reader, whether you read it on your phone, whether you read it on your screen. All these different formats give you a different impression because they have different like social connotations. Hardcovers are like sort of like more like a luxury kind of thing, more like a bespoke kind of thing. In a lot of cases, we're like, yeah, this something I really enjoy, but also it's like something that is worth money to me. So I'm going to treat myself to reading a nice hardcover, whereas like a paperback has these connotations of being more like a student kind of thing, more like a cheaper thing. Oftentimes that kind of goes over into like the quality, right? Which is why we call pulps, and whereas reading on the screen, whether it's on your phone, it's more like do something
well,
on the
I
side
thought pulp was a
casually.
reference to like the paper they used.
Yeah, yeah. But for example, if you read on your computer screen, it kind of also brings up like the experience of like doing stuff for work, for university, for school, or whatever. So all these like sort of environments kind of play into your reading experience, no matter what you do. Which obviously, when you move over to like what you call them audiobooks, you have the same issue even worse because then you have like another layer of performance in there. But like reading is not just having consuming the text, it's always like the environment around us, like where we read, how we read, and so forth. That always kind of goes into that, I think.
Oh yeah, that's right. Didn't you make the video where you were kind of like, oh man, why they got to put Andy Serkis on the audio for?
Yeah, I made a video about that. It's like I don't like the performance is great. I just think it kind of takes away part of the possible imagination of the listener because you always have like the images from the movie in your head. I mean, you have the same thing um, for everyone who just like watched the movie first before they read Lord of the Rings. They'll have the same issue, and we see that, for example, with like movie tie-in or TV series like tie-in editions of books. Right, you have like a movie cover. You have the actors on your book cover. So I mean, it's like suddenly Frodo will always look like Elijah Wood instead of like whatever you would imagine he would look like if
Yeah, it
you
always
hadn't seen the movie.
yeah, it always threw me off when I read Lord of the Rings because like they say, I guess aging is kind of slowed in Middle Earth or something. But like
Yeah.
Frodo's 50. I'm like, what the hell? What is this?
Well, I mean, hobbits age slow. Like right, they're like basically hobbits are adults when they turn 33. That's kind of the point. So like a 33-year-old hobbit would probably look like something in their early 20s, like a human in their early 20s, I guess. Sort of. But I mean, it's fantasy. You have all these weird issues. On the other hand, you have like I don't know, aging up characters in like a Game of Thrones because you can't have all those minors having sex all the time. So obviously, you play around with like imagination when you do visuals in a TV show or like or a movie. So yeah, but the thing is like it kind of hedges in your imagination when you do that. For example, I mean the whole like I mean, in a way, you have that with cover artwork as well, like paintings as well, right? You have that whole old like Wizard of Earthsea issue with Ursula Le Guin, right? I'm
Mm-hmm.
not sure if you heard about it. It's like the first edition of Wizard of Earthsea had a Geth, the wizard, on the cover, and he was like a very, very stereotypical white Caucasian guy, which is very much not how she describes him in the book, because there's a lot of like native influences. Like he's described as having copper skin. It's like, why is there a white dude on the cover? And that's
They
like
were
because of
probably
expectations
pandering to
that
an audience, to be honest with you.
yeah, yeah. And Ursula Le Guin was pissed about it, obviously.
I'm sure. Yeah, I'd be mad too.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting thing. Like Stephen Erickson has talked about that as well. It's like a lot of times when people drew fan art of like the Malazan Book of the Fallen characters, a lot of those end up being white in the fan art, whereas that's not necessarily how he describes those characters in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, where most characters are not exactly stereotypical white guys, but have like all kinds of darker skin. And things like if you don't put like explicit physical descriptions in your book or make them like less obvious, the chances like people will imagine characters looking like them, right? It's like if there's no description of like what skin color or hair color a character has, like the main character, if you're not a stereotypical white person reading that book, you'll probably imagine them looking more like the people around you. The same goes for like houses or whatever. It's like you go like your characters go into a village and there's like there's this large tavern. It's like how would you imagine that tavern? It's like I living in Europe will probably imagine if it's fantasy, looking old timey, like having a very stereotypical like Middle European kind of Central European kind of medieval housing with like the black wood frame with like the white plaster in between, because that's how I imagine houses, like medieval looking houses by someone living in say India or living in China or living in Japan. They will have different ideas of like what a house looks like. And that's kind of the thing that books are so great about, right? They allow us to fill in a lot of the blanks, especially if it's fantasy. Like it's fantasy. Use your fantasy. Don't use someone else's, right? Unless it's very specifically set in a very specific thing, and then you have like Robert Jordan spending pages on pages on pages on pages to describe like the very specific architecture of a city.
Oh yeah, you read Wheel of Time. You know, I've come to realize that like I'm not in any rush to read Wheel of Time. No, I think we talked about this a little bit when we last had a podcast,
Mm-hmm.
but it just never sounded that interesting to me. I mean, I'd like to read it one day, because I'd feel bad as a fantasy fan if I didn't at least like look through it and know what it was about. But I
Yeah.
don't know, it just doesn't tickle my fancy.
Yeah. In that case, don't read like I think Wheel of Time. I read it for like once again like for historical reasons. I'm interested in the fantasy genre. I'm like, yeah, it's been hugely influential. At some point, I've got to read it. There's a bunch of these kind of authors where I'm like, yeah, it's probably not my cup of tea, but like if I want to be qualified to talk about the fantasy genre as a whole or whatever, then I got to read Wheel of Time at some point because yeah, all the other stuff. Same goes for like I don't know, probably at some point in my life I'll have to read Twilight or whatever because it has
Oh
had a
no,
huge impact.
I read that when I was younger. Let me tell you, it was not fun. But
Yeah, I did. I was very much too old and in like a very different headspace when these books came out. But like, if I want to talk about urban fantasy and where it or whatever that kind of stuff, then yeah, I gotta read it. It's not gonna necessarily end up with me making like videos about it or talking about it like in public, but it's something I can draw on when I want to make a comparison or whatever and say like, here, there's an influence. That's kind of the thing. With Wheel of Time, I just like felt compelled to do it like in public because I get angry.
also you run a YouTube channel where you talk about fantasy, so you're.
Yeah, but there's books I've read, or like even now, there's books I read that I don't talk about in detail. Just like I may mention it in like my weekly updates. Like I read this book, then that's that. Just like sometimes there's nothing to say about a book. Because I'm like, hey, I enjoyed it. It was fine. Sometimes I think that's for me that's important. As like if you run a YouTube channel, there's this tendency to turn everything you do. You start out like doing this because you love it. You love talking about books, and suddenly you end up like it becomes more of like a duty or like an expectation to talk about everything, to turn like everything into content, to turn like your entire hobby into content, and suddenly you're reading for the channel and not for yourself. And that's why sometimes I read a book and I'm like, yeah, this is just for me. This is not for anyone else. This is me reading this book, having fun with it, and I don't have to think about like what to say about it in public. I don't have to think about like how to present it or whatever. And for me, that's important to sort of keep like the joy of reading, making sure that it doesn't turn suddenly into like a job, basically. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously you don't get paid for it anyway, or like not a lot anyway.
Yeah, I've been kind of, I mean, I've not been struggling with that, but I've been kind of like, just, I don't know. There's just been a lot of things. My reading's been kind of slower this year because, well,
Mm,
for one, I haven't been reading. I've been reading a lot of very good books. I haven't been reading a lot of great books, and
yeah,
also, I'm reading like Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell right now, which is very chunky
yeah.
book and is a very big commitment, even though it's
It
only
is
one book.
that.
I'm enjoying it though. I'm liking it.
It's a good book. I think it has one part later on I found when I read it like dragged a bit for me. I just saw they're doing like a 20th anniversary edition later this year. Apparently, I don't know what changed. If they just like if they added stuff or if it's the same thing, but it has like I don't know forward by whatever other author, probably Neil Gaiman or whatever.
I was about to say like Neil Gaiman's jumping on.
Well, I mean, to be fair, Neil Gaiman has called it one of the most important British fantasy novel of the 20th century or of the last century or something like that, like fairly early on, and has mentioned it numerous times.
Oh,
So,
look at that. It says on my copy, unquestionably the finest English novel of the fantastic written in the last 70 years. From Neil Gaiman.
yeah,
Thank you,
Neil
Neil.
Gaiman. And do you know which the why he said in the last 70 years?
I'm not, no.
Because the one that he's always mentioned as another one of the finest British fantasy novels written in the 20th century is Blood in the Mist by Bob Marley,
Ah,
which was published in the like mid 1920s. So that's where that comes from, I think.
I still need to read that. Also, I think that one of the copies has a Neil Gaiman forward. I even have a
It
copy of the King of Elfland's Daughter, which also has a Neil Gaiman introduction.
Yeah. Look, at this point in time, Neil Gaiman has written more forwards, back cover blurbs, and introductions than he has written actual original fiction for himself.
What can I say? The man is a student of fantasy literature, which is
Yeah, and
why I think he's an interesting author.
yeah, I think that's like one of those things that he's incredibly well read. You can really very often like recognize his influences and inspirations in his books. And he's doing something that I really appreciate, which is like using his popularity that he got through like um, Sandman and Good Omens and later American Gods. He's using the popularity to sort of popularize or spread the good word about classics of fantasy that have otherwise gotten lost or been forgotten. Because while Gaiman's style is very very eclectic, and he collects like inspirations from all over the place. A lot of these are lesser known books, like for example, Lot in the Mist, which is not exactly a fantasy bestseller, mainstream bestseller of the last 100 years. Same goes, for example, for what I recently read, A Fine and Private Place by Peter S. Beagle, which was his debut novel from 1960. And you read that book and you're like, yeah, this is a Neil Gaiman book, basically. It's about this guy living. It's about a former pharmacist who kind of had a bit of like both business and personal struggles and became homeless and moved into a cemetery. Now he's living on a cemetery, and there's a talking raven that brings him sandwiches that he steals. So that's how he's eating, and he can talk to the spirits of the newly departed, and he helps them slowly move over into the realm of the dead. And that does sound like the most Neil Gaiman book that Neil Gaiman has not written. And yes, there is, of course, a Neil Gaiman forward for the new edition of that one. But that's the thing is like,
I'm surprised Patrick Rothfuss didn't do it. Isn't he a big Peter Beagle fan?
Raf did an introduction of forward for like a new edition of The Last Unicorn,
Ah, yes, that's right.
which I think is more appropriate. Like, Find Private Place is very much a Neil Gaiman kind of book.
That's
Um,
fair. I mean, I think Neil Gaiman is at least one of the best fantasists we have living today. I mean, I don't know. You might get angry and rabble at Steven Erickson,
no,
but
I think what you said earlier when you called him like a student of fantasy, I would very much agree. I'm not sure about his writings. Like, I mean, they're a bit hit and miss. They're certainly unique, and I think that's something that what Neil Gaiman has is a very, very specific, unique voice, a very
Mhm.
characteristic voice. You can recognize a Neil Gaiman text after, I don't know, like 5 sentences. You know, this is Neil Gaiman. That's
Mhm.
certainly something that not many authors actually develop to that level of strength. Like, Terry Pratchett obviously had that. Neil
Mhm.
Gaiman has it. There's a few others, but it's not that many, and that's certainly something very, very like unique and special, and that does make him, stand out. I don't necessarily like all of his stuff, but
That's
once again,
fair.
like
Not every one of his books are like great.
yeah,
I mean, I liked Ocean at the End of the Lane, but there were some times where it was a bit too weird for its own good.
it's incredibly creepy. Because for whatever reason, almost all Neil Gaiman texts sooner or later at least hint at child abuse.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
that's
very
that's a
much.
good point. Yeah, you're just like, geez, Neil, what happened to you when you
Well,
were a kid? You need some like,
I don't know.
go to therapy or something. Oh wait, no, wait, he's not a Scientologist anymore, but I know his family are Scientologists.
I have no idea. I've never looked too much into his biography. I think, but like as I said, like he's a student of us. Like few people have understood like the different like forms of the fantastic of the last century as well as Neil Gaiman. That makes him stand out. He's very, very good at that, which is like why I said why I called his style like very eclectic. He takes stuff from everywhere because he's read an awful lot. That definitely helps.
Yeah, or like
Once again, that helps a lot.
I mean, it's weird. Like I don't know, like how maybe the only people I could say is perhaps Moorcock is probably a good example. I mean, as a student of the genre, and
Mm.
I can't really think of anyone else really at least at the moment. There's probably
I mean,
there's
there's
probably more.
there's definitely like obviously there's like actual academics that don't necessarily write their own like own fantasy books, but do write a lot of academic texts on that stuff. Like people like Farah Mendelssohn, Brian Atbury, what's her name, John Clute, definitely. Those people,
Oh
of
yeah,
course,
John. I totally forgot about John Clute. The guy's underrated.
those
I wish
people definitely. I
I wish
think
more people
one that
read John Clute.
I don't know. He's a character in a recent La Vitidor novel, which is really funny.
Yeah, I've been kind of weird. I've been kind of curious about Lavi Tihar because I'm like, oh
Mm.
man, seems a little too meta for my. He might get a little too cute. Like I don't
It
love the like
really,
because I'm kind of on and off with like meta stuff.
it really depends with Cheetah. He can do all kinds of really cool stuff. But like one other, like definitely like incredibly powerful scholar of the fantastic that often gets ignored, I think, is Diana Wynne Jones. Definitely,
Oh yeah, she did Howl's Moving Castle, didn't she?
she did Howl's Moving Castle. She did like a lot of other stuff, and I'm not 100% sure, but I think she's one of the. There's like two, three fantasy authors that actually, because she's like incredibly old. I don't even know if she's still alive. I haven't checked. Anyway, she studied under Tolkien. Like she studied English in Oxford while Tolkien was still teaching in the 60s.
Wow, that's cool.
And she's written a book that he that's really fun. It's the Tough Guide to Fantasyland, which is written as a it's sort of like that's why I call it like a scholar of fantasy. It's written sort of like an encyclopedia or like travel guide to Fantasyland, making a lot of very funny sort of like ironic jokes about different tropes, conventions, and so forth of fantastic, which is really fun to read.
Yeah, I'll have
Like
to.
how horses always behave properly, how horses
Oh,
don't do a lot of things that horses usually do, but in Fantasyland they just do that because fantasy horses obviously behave that way and stuff like that. It's really really funny. So yeah, Diana Wynne Jones definitely.
yeah. No, I'll have to check that out. I mean, there's so
Yeah.
much fantasy to read. It's ridiculous. I mean, like there's
Hmm.
Malazan, which I've said it before, but like I'm actually more open to trying Malazan because it actually seems more up my alley of stuff that I like. So I mean, we'll see. I'll have to
I
maybe
personally like
next
it, but
year I'll give it a shot, but we'll see.
it's it, it's very on based, and it's you know, don't get intimidated by people telling you that you have to be really smart about it. Don't let people that claim it's
Yeah, I know. You know what? You know what?
YA.
You know what bugs me about the Malazan fans? They never talk about any of the cool stuff. Like like they're always like, "Oh man, you gotta be big brain in order to get through it." I'm like, I don't know. And then
Yeah, I think
there's like dinosaurs and like people and like there's people who can like turn into flies or whatever. The cool names, like no one mentions that. It drives me crazy. I'm like,
yeah,
you could sell your book more if you brought up the like cool stuff in there. And come on,
yeah,
people like
yeah.
cool things.
It's got dinosaurs shooting lasers.
Also, apparently has a floating city. I'm like, oh, okay, all right.
Yeah,
But
it's
yeah,
got like this huge ass like floating like rock kind of thing, moonspawn, which is
which shoots laser beams, apparently, according to one of my friends. Or maybe I'm wrong.
yeah. Yeah, let's just say laser beams may happen in that vicinity, but it's not quite sure whether it depends on the floating city. There's a bunch of them.
I mean, Whiskey Jack, cool name. Animander Rake, cool name. Like, come on. Like,
There's a lot of good stuff in Milan. I think and that's like one of those problems
market
with
Malazan better. Make it a hashtag. I'm calling out the Malazan fan base. Market your book better.
yeah, I think Malazan, and it's not the only one. There's a bunch of these. There's like a certain part of the fantasy reading, like the fantasy community. Some of them are on BookTube, not all of them. Some of them are, writing essays or whatever. Like, there's a certain part of fantasy fandom that really tries hard to make sure that they're adult fantasy readers and that they're like, it's a mark of distinction in a lot of ways, and it's the same kind of people that go and talk about how Book of the New Sun is all these like incredibly deep and complex stuff, and how you need to be really smart. And it's kind of people that also go and talk about how, say, um, Jenny Wirtz's Wars of Light and Shadow. I haven't read them, so I can't speak on that. Um, Oftentimes, like R. Scott Baker's Second Apocalypse gets mentioned in that kind of areas. They talk about a specific sort of fantasy and the way it's talked about. And I'm certainly sort of like adjacent to that oftentimes because I enjoy a lot of these books. A lot of times, the way it's talked about kind of makes it very clear that you're sort of above the fantasy rabble that just read everything and they read their Brandon Sanderson and they read their Wheel of Time or whatever. Like they read all this slop, and we're like more, refined and more like maybe better educated and smarter, and we're looking for deeper meaning in fantasy. And that's I don't like that.
What do you like, Raf? Well, Malazan. I know you like Malazan
I
and
don't.
Terry Pratchett. I know you like Terry
I don't
Pratchett.
like. I don't like the approach. I think like building these artificial sort of distinctions within the fantastic can be like it's actually detrimental. It's like we're doing the same thing within fantasy that people like Salman Rushdie do or Margaret Atwood do when they sort of go like, "No, I'm not reading. I'm not writing science fiction. I'm writing speculative fiction. I'm not writing fantasy. I'm writing magical realism." It's like, dude, you're doing a retelling of Thousand and One Nights. That's fantasy. That's not magical realism by per se. And those people then once again react towards like trying to distinguish themselves from doing fantasy because they want to be respected by the capital L like big literature, serious literature folks. And I'm like, we're building these artificial sort of distinctions between different groups, and it's all just to sort of show that we're better than the other guys and we're smarter than the other guys. That's just sort of to gain attention of a supposedly sort of limited resource, which is sort of respect, I guess. And we want to get as much of it as possible, so we're going to try to exclude anyone in any way or shape or form. I don't like that approach in both with writers and with readers. I don't think that's helpful. It's like, if people like whatever, Twilight, for example, if they're happy with Twilight, look, they're having fun with that. That's great. Will other people turn into Malazan readers? Maybe some of them in the future. Who knows? But like the whole idea of thinking that someone liking one book is less smart, less educated,
Wait,
whatever.
didn't you make a video about this? Like Malazan, like doesn't make you smarter or something like that? I think
I made a video about that like years ago. I think 2 years ago. So I constantly get pissed off about that whole thing.
Well, I guess it's a good thing I got you for Is Fantasy Literature, because like I was originally gonna get Jordan from iWizard, and then he couldn't do it, and I'm all like, okay, whatever. And then I'm like, Raf knows what he's talking about. I'll get Raf on. I'll see how.
Yeah, I mean, I think like, we're talking about art, and art should not have like these different should not be used as a tool to sort of build more distinctions. That that's very much like the class distinction thing that people like Bourdieu talk about in that regard, where they're like, yeah, we use these as marks of distinction, and we build up our cultural capital and so forth. Yes, there are certainly advantages to being highly educated and having that cultural capital, and coming from like an educated background. It will be easier to read certain books because you have like the background. I'm very, very fortunate or privileged in that regard, that I've had a lot of like very also classical education. So there's like stuff I recognize in books, so that's easier for me. That makes some stuff more accessible to me than to some other people. But if we go and tell people that they're not smart enough for this, we like
it's gonna piss everyone off.
Yeah,
people don't like being told that.
Of course not, but like, of course, that's the one part. The other part is like, if we tell everyone like this is only a book for very smart people, a lot of people will not even try it because there's that fear of not measuring up and not being smart enough to get it, and that will prevent a lot of people from just reading it and enjoying it. Because honestly, there's very few books where like you need to be incredibly highly educated. That's bullshit. It's like you can enjoy whatever you want to enjoy for all kinds of different reasons. And that's like the beauty of a good book, is that it works in all these different levels. Like the things that you, for example, enjoy in a book are probably different things that what I enjoy in a book, and that's fine. And telling people how to read a book correctly, or how to enjoy a book correctly, let me put it that way. How to enjoy a book correctly, I think, is a very, very wrong approach to doing these things. And I'm always annoyed when Malazan is like a very good example for that. I think because there is a tendency within parts of the fandom to do exactly that. And
well,
yeah,
I just noticed people on our side of the internet really like getting hyped up about things. So I'm just like, guys, talk about the freaking dinosaurs with the sword hands and the laser beams. People will want to read that.
It does, in that regard, have like a very specific, almost like anime style of like craziness in some regards.
It's like Perdido Street Station. Perdido Street Station, there is a gigantic spider that speaks in free verse poetry.
Yeah.
How does one not want to know what that is? Go read it.
Yeah.
There's a bird man who uses a
things.
whip. It's freaking awesome. Like, come on.
Yeah.
No, I think they're both different books, but this is.
Yeah.
And I think Perdido Street Station's pretty underappreciated, at least on our side of the internet. It's starting to change a little bit because.
Yeah, I think.
And people are like, "Oh my gosh, this book is so good. Where was it?" And I'm like, "Oh god."
No, I read it. I read it in 2005.
And you read it again for YouTube. I saw those streams. I had to miss the last one, unfortunately, but because I was looking forward to what everyone thought of the thought crime. or not thought crime. The oh,
Choice theft.
choice theft. Thank you. I was like, dang it, what?
Yeah.
It's not thought crime.
Choice
That's
theft.
1984.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But I did end up having some chats. I talked with you, and I commented
Yeah.
on Angela's video, and I talked with Jared about it because I thought it
Um,
was because it was funny because I brought this up in my video about
mhm.
that I did with Jimmy and Amanda.
Yeah.
Um, because I think why I asked that about Perdido Street Station is because when she says you would call it rape, and then he gets all
Mhm.
mad, and she's all like, "Well, hold on, it's not what you would think rape is." That's kind of what. There now, Jimmy was messing. He was joking. He was all like, "Oh, it's because he's your boy." I'm like, "Well, no, but it's just like it's weird. It's that cultural difference, you know."
Yeah, but I think like at the end, like my point always is like it doesn't really matter on the mechanical sense. Like, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm,
It's
mm-hmm.
about the effects. It's like all form of like, these kind of crimes are about taking away choices, taking away
Maybe I'm just
agency, making
overthinking it.
someone
That's
feel
that's definitely a
helpless.
possibility.
Hmm?
I said I definitely could be overthinking it. That's a possibility. It's always a possibility.
Yeah, yeah, and that's kind of my point. Like at the end of the day, the mechanics don't matter if it has that effect. That's the point, right?
Yeah.
It's about taking away. It's about taking away agency, taking away freedom, taking away agency, and making someone feel helpless, making someone feel like an object, basically. And that's not a situation anyone wants to be in. So the mechanics don't really matter after that, I think.
That's true. But you know, still a great book.
Yeah, of course.
I think the ending is really no. I did have some friends who were like, "What? That was the end?" I'm like, "Oh man, that end was one of the best parts. What are you talking about?"
Yeah, I think, I mean, in that regard, I think Perdido Street Station kind of stands out because it doesn't have that traditional fantasy structure. It doesn't end, someone, I mean, technically, I guess they saved the world.
Kind of.
Yeah, that's the point.
They saved the city.
They save the city for now, and then, but everyone loses and just goes on. It's like, okay, fuck it. And
Lynn
I think,
gets freaking lobotomized basically,
yeah,
and the machine. I guess he just is like, okay, I guess we'll move on. Um,
yeah,
and well, yeah, it's just it's not a fun time. New
no, it's
Corpazon
not.
doesn't seem like a fun place to be in, though. I mean, I don't know if Malazan's any similar. It's probably it's not a fun place to be at.
I think the main point with like places like Malazan or New Probizon is that they are in a lot of ways reflections of our world. There's
Mm-hmm.
stuff that there's definitely stuff that is really cool, much better than our world. Like the Malazan world, for example, is a fairly gender equal, inclusive kind of place where I mean that the entire army is like very much has gender equality, right? It's like they have like
Mm-hmm.
it's just something that is baked into the world by design by Aslan. So in that regard, it might just be better than our world, right? But then there's obviously other stuff like war is still shit, right?
Yeah, war is not fun. Um, though I mean,
Yeah.
if you want like a more traditional fantasy novel, I guess The Scar from China Mieville is more like a traditional quest, though kind of. I don't know if you've read The Scar, but
Really, like years ago, that's the pirate one, right?
yes, that's the pirate one.
Yeah, and the Iron Council is the let's unionize kind of one.
Yes, that's the Revolution one, and also my least favorite of the books, at least so far. It could be wrong. Though I do hear that I do hear that there is a good Conan XB in Malazan.
Well, there is a character, Ian,
Who's kind of like
from
Conan,
Lab.
I've heard.
yes and no. It's a bit complicated. Erickson even wrote like an essay on that specific character. It's called the problem of Karsa Orlong, and it's very much a deconstruction of looking at that character, at the barbarian character within role playing games, and obviously the Conan archetype from Robert E. Howard, and he's doing very interesting things with that character. That's like, let's just put it that way. He's a massive badass, and you can just like go like, wow, awesome. He's like Conan. He's just like slaughtering everyone, and that's one way of doing it. But if you think that's what makes Conan Conan, you might even be reading Conan the wrong way.
Maybe. I mean, again, I haven't read Malazan or Malazan yet, so I mean, I don't know. I've been there are people I respect, like you, who really enjoy it, and then there's people I respect who are like, it's a waste of time. So I mean, I don't know. It's kind of, I guess that's not really an excuse. You could say that about pretty much any book under the sun, but you know,
Yeah, I think it kind of depends on what you expect from books. It also depends on like what kind of view you have of literature, what you want books to be like. There's certainly, if I mean, if your idea of fantasy is more on the formulaic side, there's nothing wrong with having like very specific formulaic, fantasy stories that follow fairly well established plot structures and do their hero's journey and do the whole thing. The Malazan Book of the Fallen will not be fun. It doesn't do that at all. But I think it really depends on those expectations. The whole idea of like what is good writing, what is bad writing, according to which standards. Um, I think in that regard, the Malazan Book of the Fallen does certainly challenge a lot of conventions of the fantasy genre. It's obviously not the first book doing that. It's not the last doing that, but it does that, which
fair
may
enough.
which is one of those reasons like when people sort of like they read like the Stormlight Archives by Brandon Sanderson and go like, wow, this is the best fantasy I've ever read, because it's possibly like the first like huge fantasy, like thick books. And then they go and try the last book of the phone, they might be shocked because the approach is a very different one. And so much of like how we read fantasy kind of boils down, I think, to our expectations, what we expect from a book, which is why, you know, it's always helpful to read more than one genre, because that kind of broadens your expectations. If you read like a bunch of, hard-boiled detective stories, if you read a bunch of, romances, read a bunch of like, I don't know, read some Jane Austen, it's probably going to be a good idea to do that. Read some comedies, read some realist novels, read some weird postmodern stuff. The more you read all over the place, the more like different influences you'll be able to see in fantasy, because obviously, the best fantasy authors have read widely as well, and can pull in these different things. And
I recently recommended to my friend Jason the book Light from M. John Harrison, because I did a video
yeah,
about it and I thought it was a really fascinating book. Now he didn't really take to it. I wasn't very shocked. It's kind of a weird ass book, and you know,
but that's the thing. Like, Anton Harrison is like one of the foremost sort of like postmodern British authors in general. Like, he's writing a lot of science fiction or sort of weird fiction stuff, but he's certainly respected in areas that go far beyond the science fiction genre, because he doesn't actually play according to the science fiction rules in a
well,
lot
yeah,
of
that's
ways.
why that's why I like Light a lot, is
Yeah,
because of that.
because it does do weird stuff, and that allows him to do all kinds of other stuff as well. Like, for example, one that I want to read that came out a couple of years ago, "The Sunken Land Begins to Rise,"
Oh
or
yeah,
rise
yeah, I've heard
again.
of that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, it's a weird sort of, from what I can tell, a weird sort of surrealist kind of weird fantasy novel, science fiction novel, whatever, about Brexit. And that's something you can't necessarily do in the format of a classic hero's journey fantasy novel. But you need to go weird places, and do weird stuff with that.
Yeah, I actually have Veraconium over there. I'm hoping to read it at some point this year, but if
It's
not,
more like a collection of sort of overlapping short stories. I think Vericonium is probably the best way to see it, and all set in this weird city in Vericonium in different timelines. It's very postmodern.
I mean, I don't mind postmodern. I mean, I read Pension. I read Inherent Vice. So that was a I
I
you
love
know
that book.
that's a
I
weird
love that
one.
book.
I read it. I might need to read it again. I don't know if I was in the right headspace, but I thought it was an interesting book. I think
I think
it's
yeah,
weird. It's like it reminded me a lot of like PKD, but for some reason, like Pension is just accepted by the academia for whatever reason, and PKD just is not.
I think it kind of changes or changed on PKD as well. But there's certainly like
I don't want to say
there
like they're the exact same, but I got a similar vibe. Like there's a lot of
yeah, and I
paranoia,
think
there's a lot of drug use, there's a lot of just weird,
yeah,
playful shit that they like doing. It's
yeah. I think the difference sort of
they're not the
is that
exact same, but they rhyme, if that makes sense.
yeah, I think that the main difference, especially with Inherent Vice, I think, is that Inherent Vice is a book about the time of PKD, about people that could be Philip K. Dick.
Yeah,
That's
that's
kind
a
of
good way to put
that's
it,
kind of the
actually.
difference. So it has that sort of like long perspective of some. The book was written, I don't know, 2005, 2007 ish, somewhere around that time. So it has sort of like that hindsight, but it kind of captures the time in which people like Philip K. Dick lived, capture that specific zeitgeist from back then, where that weird thing where like sort of the belief in a better or the belief in like the hope for a better future kind of got crushed and turned into just raw paranoia and sort of that like long sort of hangover or attempt to kind of get out of the drug abuse kind of thing that is American 1970s, and that's sort of like it has been, I think, Pynchon's theme for a long time. Um, because I obviously I don't know Thomas Pynchon. I mean, who does? it.
Salman
I don't
Rushdie
know how.
apparently met him after the fatwa he went through. He met him.
Who? Sorry, didn't
Salman
catch you there.
Rushdie apparently met him.
Okay, okay, interesting. I didn't know that. But I think like the main thing with Pynchon is I don't know how deeply involved he was in that very specific culture. It feels to me like he's always been more like an observer, whereas Philip K. Dick obviously was like have
He was a
like deeply.
participant.
Exactly. That's sort of like a difference there, where you have like which allows Pynchon to sort of play with the whole scene, whereas like Pynchon's looking at it from the outside, and Dick is looking at it from the inside, and that gives like different perspectives. But like the themes are the same. The moment in time is sort of the same, that they both play with that idea that where consensus reality kind of shatters in a lot of ways.
Yeah, no, yeah, it's a good it's a good way to put it, actually. I mean, but yeah, I might read Inherent Vice again. I don't know where to go next. I had a friend who's like, maybe try like Cry of Lot 49 or something. I'm like, yeah, maybe I'll do that.
Crying of Lot 49 has the big advantage of being really short.
That's true. Yes, yes.
It's not like one of these like super massive ones like Against the Day or Gravity's Rainbow. Those
Oh
are like
God.
insanely thick.
The copy I see of Gravity's Rainbow at my uh, local bookstore, which I mean,
Mm,
yeah, I know you don't really read a lot of comics, so it might not mean much to you, but like Frank Miller
yeah,
did the cover for
yeah, no,
that copy, and I'm like the Frank Miller. I texted a friend,
yeah,
and he's all like, "Yep." I'm
yeah.
like, "How the fuck?" Like, whoa, like, wait a second. How does Frank Miller, for one, even know who Thomas Pynchon is? Much less, like, well, apparently it was Thomas Pynchon's idea. I ended up reading about it later. Like, apparently Thomas Pynchon likes Frank Miller. Okay. I'm like, all right. This is like
No, I know
their
that.
styles are so different, You're like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, no, but, yeah, but yeah, I know that's Frank Miller cover. It's huge. That's like Malazan Wheel of Time sized books, right? Like 1,000 pages, whatever. Like the audiobook's like 45 hours or something.
Like
It's a
Infinite
massive
Jest or
one.
something. I have no idea how people can write that much. I mean, again, I'm reading Jonathan Strange, Mr. Norrell right now, and like, this was her first book, man. How? You
Well,
can't see
I mean,
it.
she did
You
work a
can't
lot of other
see it.
jobs
I'm
before
sorry.
as a journalist, I think, mostly. So she wrote a lot of stuff, just not novels.
It's I'm also reading Legend of Blackjack right now, which is a lot of fun.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah. Did you? There was like earlier this year. There was like a really neat kind of conversation, like panel thing that the British Library organized, um, which was Susanna Clark in conversation with Alan Moore.
oh yes, I saw a bit of that. I want to see that. I've seen it on YouTube. I want to see that because I really,
Yeah,
you know me, I'm a big Alan Moore fanboy, and
yeah.
um,
It
and
was
um,
really interesting to have those two because they know each other for like ages, from like her days as a journalist, I think already. So it's really interesting to have those two just like talk about like very specifically British things and stuff.
yeah, I mean, I like Paranasi a lot. I thought that was a really good book. I mean,
Yeah,
it's. I mean, I can't really compare it to Jonathan Strange because like Jonathan Strange is like the
it's very
opposite
different.
of Paranasi. It's very maximalist. It's very like there's footnotes in this damn thing. Like, oh my god.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't call it a
Okay.
postmodern novel, but like, my god, the footnotes, man. Oh,
I'm a Terry Pratchett person. I'm very much not phased by footnotes.
I was about to say, I heard Terry Pratchett liked footnotes.
Pratchett is in that regard very much sort of in the same ballpark as Douglas Adams.
I do love Douglas Adams. I love
So
Hitchhiker's Guide to the
it's the
Galaxy.
same style of footnotes that you get in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where you have like footnotes that are basically just to make more jokes about other stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I always tell people who like really are on that Terry Pratchett train. I'm like, guys, Douglas Adams, read him.
Yeah, they are very similar in that regard, which
But
is
you
of
know,
course why I love Douglas Adams as well.
yeah. I'm actually speaking of that. I'm actually hoping to try Guards this year, which I'm sure is very intriguing to you. It's one of those like it's not on my like official like planned reads, but like it's definitely
Yeah,
on the if I have time, I'll pick it up and give it a shot.
it's. I know a lot of people recommend it as like the first Discworld novel. I'm not sure if that's good, but a lot of people love the City Watch books in general. That's like the first City Watch book, so it makes sense to read those in order.
You're gonna tell me
I like
that
it.
or Color of Magic, and I've seen a lot of people go kind of meh about Color of Magic.
Color of Magic, I personally like it. I understand why. Color of Magic is not as accessible and it's not very representative of Discworld because it's very much like basically like a fix-up of a couple of like short stories or novellas,
Yeah, I mean it's
and
yeah.
it's
Sorry.
far more surrealist and it's far more explicitly sort of parodying specific aspects of fantasies. Like there's a lot of like Conan and Fafnir and Grey Mouser jokes in there. There's a lot, like it's very explicitly poking fun at very specific forms of fantasy, at very specific forms of say Dungeons and Dragons, tabletop role playing games and stuff like that. And if you don't have that background, a lot of the jokes just won't land.
Fair
Like
enough.
there's a scene like early on in the book where they meet two characters and they're called the Weasel and Brav the Hublander. And yeah, that's a Fafhrd and Grey Mouse joke. I mean, if you've never read Fafhrd and the Grey Mouse, you won't get the joke. And there's more of that kind of stuff in there. So I think that's why Color of Magic doesn't work for a lot of people.
It's
Um,
kind of that's funny. Maybe I'll check out Color Magic as well at some point soon.
I
But
think that
I'm very set on Guards though. So
it's a good book. Don't
you're
get me
probably not going to deter
wrong.
me from trying that one
No,
first.
no, 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 don't get me wrong. It's a very good book. I think there's value in reading Discworld in publication order. because you can see Terry Pratchett as a writer grow and change, and Discworld grow and change with him and with his interests and where he moves, like what kind of annoys him at what point in time. Because Pratchett is a very political writer. It's one of those things that sometimes gets lost. But like Pratchett writes about the things that piss him off. This is like like when Pratchett died, or was shortly before he died. There was like an an article written by Neil Gaiman, um, at the I think it's on the Guardian, with the Guardian. I think it's probably still on the website. And it's like Terry Pratchett is not jolly; he's angry, and he obviously Neil Gaiman knows, but I think it's important to understand that Pratchett knew that at some point. He, what drives Discworld is Terry Pratchett being annoyed with the world. Terry Pratchett writes about social injustice his entire career. He uses like parody and fantasy humor to do that, but his books are very much about gender equality, about racism, how it sucks, about classism, very often about class difference and stuff like that. That's like the motor that drives Discworld is Terry Pratchett being pissed off by our world and going like, I'm going to do something about it. And what he does is like very angry satire, basically.
Fair enough. But again, yeah, guards. I'm pretty set on that.
Yeah, it's really cool.
I'll let you know I'll let you know, and I'll let Derry know what I think once I eventually get around to reading it, which I hope will be sometime soon.
It's got fantasy's best librarian.
All right, I look forward to it. But I went on a very long side tangent. But getting back to Malazan, or Malazan, I've given up. I'm just gonna I'll use it interchangeably if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. I don't care. I'm not one of those people that kind of get mad about wrong pronunciation. That's bullshit. I mean, come on.
Oh man, my hope is that like I don't unintentionally piss off the Malazan fans and they like get in the comments and start like ranting at me. I don't think so, but it's happened before. Like I made a video about the Republic of Thieves and I mentioned like Joanna and Jimmy offhand, and they saw the video and they commented on it. I'm like, well, I won't play coy. I know they know who I am. I've had them on this show, but I was like, okay, well, all right.
I have not read The Republic of Thieves. That's the second one? No, that's the third one, right?
It's I don't get me wrong. I love the Lies of Locke. I quite enjoyed Red Seas Under Red Skies, but yeah, Republic of Thieves. Well, I made a video about it. I don't want to get into it. But back to
Yeah,
Malazan.
I've only read Lies of Locke, and then I tried to read Red Sails Under Red Seas, and I folded. I kind of gave up after like 2 chapters, and that's mostly because I started listening to it somewhere, and then I just like lost interest. I started listening to it at the gym, and then I went back from the gym, and I just started doing something else, and then I never got back to it. It's like at some point I'm going to read it. At some point I'm going to read Republic of Thieves, but it's going to take a while.
Well, I mean, I don't think it's the best thing that Scott Lynch has done. But again, I don't want to get on another side tangent. But Malazan, I guess another thing that interests me about Malazan, at least so far, is that
Yeah.
I know Erickson can be. I hope he doesn't comment on this video and get mad at me, but I know he can be a little cantankerous, which that's understandable. There's a lot of cantankerous authors out there.
I don't think cantankerous is the right word,
And
though.
let me get to my point. I find it interesting that like he is not as touched by Tolkien as so many other, kind of like Mieville in that sense, or even what you gave him a Was that a bad
No, I would say I've never seen Stephen Erickson comment negatively on anyone's videos. He's never
Well,
done
yeah,
that.
okay, that would probably make him look bad, and it's probably not worth the effort anyway. He's like, I got all this money, like, fuck you, bitches.
I don't think that's how it goes. He's not that type. Anyway, my
I
point
don't know
is,
him. I'm being facetious here, but
I've spoken to him once in an interview, and he's one of the most humble and nicest people I've ever spoken to. incredibly nice guy. My point is, no, it's not that influenced by Tolkien. It's very much influenced by the more like pulp side of things, by Conan, by Fafner the Grey Mouser, by Black Company, heavily influenced by Black Company, and all kinds of other stuff from all over the place. And I think, there's this essay when he talks about that, which I think is probably where you get the cantankerous thing from, is like, that,
Hey, we all
where you can
get a
see him
little
being
cantankerous sometimes. You get cantankerous. You have a whole channel about it sometimes.
yeah, that situation
okay.
where, as a fantasy author for a while, and I think that's sort of where that whole China Mieville thing also comes from, is like, there was a time, especially obviously around the early 2000s, after the Lord of the Rings movies were like big. Like, if you wrote fantasy at the time and it was big enough for someone like outside of the genre to ask you questions, they'll always ask you about Tolkien. Even people from like within the genre will always ask you about Tolkien and Lord of the Rings and try to compare your stuff to Lord of the Rings. And that annoys a lot of people, understandably.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of the thing that I mean, technically, that all goes all the way back to Michael Moorcock and Epic Pooh.
Yeah, I was about to mention Epic Pooh. Oh my god, it's not a new thing.
This is this whole like thing that Terry Pratchett said about Tolkien that I found really interesting, and I think it's quoted in the Epic Pooh essay, or it may have been somewhere else. Well, Pratchett talks about Tolkien, says like, Lord of the Rings is to fantasy what Mount Fuji was to Japanese postcards in the 50s and 60s and 70s. It's like, the only time when you can't see it is when you're standing right on top of it, because it's always going to be there somewhere.
That's a good point. That's actually a good point. Yeah. You know, I recently made a video about if fantasy is in an identity crisis, and you were featured. I read some comments you gave me because
no.
You know, I didn't want to. I'll admit, it was sort of a preemptive thing because I didn't want to get like cold sweats and you make a video going like you're wrong, but you know.
No. I mean.
But that brings a lot of interesting, that's actually one of the, stuff like Epic Pooh is kind of why I made that video is because I'm kind of interested in you know, and there's other people who've made similar videos too. Like I saw Leanne's Library do a video of a similar sort, except it was more like, why is all these fantasy novels medieval instead of like, is the genre like kind of held back a little bit in general? Because I was trying to be more general to the genre. I guess epic fantasy. I don't know. Also,
I think there's like, I mean, I think the problem with any genre is, and it's sort of like one of the things that you kind of sort of, I guess, get more relaxed about if you have like a more like long-term perspective, or, you know, I've read a lot, I've been around for a while, like any kind of genre, both like fantasy or science fiction or like even music genres, like these things are sort of like periodic. Like from time to time, that question comes up: is this in a crisis? And you'll have them again and again and again. Some people go like, well, I guess at the moment we're sort of waiting for the next big thing that kind of comes into fantasy, and then it gets kind of, you know, integrated, and then things move on. And after a while, you know, we'll find the next big thing. And I guess in a way, fantasy is certainly currently sort of at the end of one of these cycles, right? We had sort of like the grimdark cycle. We had the on other parts we had like the urban fantasy paranormal romance cycle, and I think that's kind of gone. We had the more like big epic fantasy cycle that you sort of see starting kicking off with Tad Williams, Robert Jordan, and up to a point both Robin Hobb and George R. Martin. And then you have like that kind of get refined, kind of gets turned up to 11, like the grimdark cycle with people like Joe Abercrombie and Richard K. Morgan and what's his name, Mark Lawrence, that's the guy, and people like that, and those things kind of come in sort of like periods. You have like these small trends, and then you move on to the next thing, and you move on to the next thing. That always happens. That's always been the case. and I feel that we're currently sort of at the end of the grimdark cycle, and sort of waiting for the next thing. It's not yet quite clear what that could be. It could be the I mean, obviously, romantasy and dragon porn is kind of a big thing right now, but I'm not sure if that has the staying power to sort of like kind of take over the entire fantastic genre of the fantasy. But we're sort of waiting. So I think everyone's sort of like waiting for the next big thing to come in and sort of sweep everyone off their feet. And I think for a while people hoped that it would be sort of cozy fantasy when Legends and Lotus became this big thing for a moment. But I'm not sure if that has sort of like the staying power. And that's kind of the question, I think. And these things are circular and sort of come in waves, I guess. And we're waiting for the next wave, I think. So I don't think it's a crisis. It's sort of like more the feeling of a crisis if you don't take that long view. And in the long view, you're like, yeah, well, we're waiting for the next sort of thing that will
Well, I
maybe
mean,
influence the next 10 years.
Well, I mean, I always try to acknowledge that I could be wrong, because, like, I'm just have this weird thing where I don't like speaking with certainty on things, because if I did, then that says I'm, like, an expert on it, when definitely not.
Yeah.
I mean, I know a lot about the fantasy genre. I'm not a scholar or anything, but, like, you know, I've read it a lot for a long time, and, excuse me for a moment. Get in here, goddamn cat. Sorry about that. Yeah, I'm talking about you, looking at me. Like,
What's a cat called?
Jerry.
Jerry, okay.
Yeah. No, but what was I saying? Oh yeah, I've read fantasy for a long time,
Yeah.
and I've gotten to know a lot about the genre. So, and you know, just from what I've noticed, I mean, you know, there's these traditions, and I'm curious if, you know, there are people who are curious if there's a different way forward. Because, like, you know, I'll read something like Perdido Street Station or Black Leopard Red Wolf or American Gods, and I think, man, I wish there were more fantasy books like that. I'm sure there are. I don't know where they're at the moment, but...
Well, I mean, technically you have that whole idea of like the new weird with, like, you know, China Miéville. Michael Swanwick kind of goes into that direction.
Or even the Vor,
Obviously,
for that matter. I mean, I won't pretend... I don't know if the Vor is as masterful as the other three books I read, but I really appreciated the Vor a lot.
Yeah. I think the main problem with those kind of books is that they are always going to be sort of like the fringe kind of things, because they're...
Oh, but I like fringe, Raf. Like, I
Yeah.
like the fringe. It sounds bad.
Yeah, but
Please don't take that out of
don't get me wrong.
context.
That's totally fine. I like the fringe stuff as well, but I think it's important to understand that, like, something like Perdido Street Station will never have like the power to sort of become the next big thing in fantasy. It's going to be
Probably
like the
not.
thing, you know. It's gonna end up on like a bunch of the usual like short lists for like awards. You know, it's going to be sort of like
Well,
on
New
the short
Weird
list for
was
like a
kind of a
Hugo,
thing for a
Nebula,
while,
Locus, or
wasn't it?
whatever. What?
Well, New Weird was kind of a thing for a while, wasn't it?
Yeah, but it never was like, you know, the big selling thing. It was
Oh,
always like it was like, you know, Swanwick, Jeff Vandermeer, my, you know, China Miéville, a couple more, and it was sort of like the new hot thing that everyone sort of talked about in the more like sort of concerned fantasy. Concerned fandom, like the more active fandom. I think that's one of the things that kind of changed, sort of, maybe, with the advent of stuff like BookTube and BookTalk and all that stuff. Is like there's a new generation of people talking fantasy that are not part of the old school fantasy fandom. You know, the people that go to the Worldcon, the people that actually vote on Hugos, that care about Hugos, the people that vote on like Nebulas and Locus Awards, the people that read Locus Mag and stuff like that. That's a different crowd, I think.
perhaps, yeah.
And during that time, the early 2000s, late 90s, that newer sort of like what I would always call like bookfluencers kind of, we weren't there yet. Like, I mean, in a way, like, as speaking as a group, we weren't there yet. So New Weird was spoken about by those people that were writing in those different fantasy magazines, people that voted on Hugo's and went to conventions. For those people, for critics, so to speak, New Weird was a big deal. But I don't think it was ever like the biggest sellers at the time. I guess it would. The best sellers in like the early 2000s was probably mostly Wheel of Time.
Probably, yeah,
And
that's a
what's
good
his
point.
name? R.A. Salvatore and people like
Mieville
that.
is definitely more of like a cult author for sure. Not really.
Mm.
I never really saw him as like one who would gain like a bunch of like, oh man, Mieville, he knows what he's doing.
I think like the interesting thing with those kind of authors is like fantasy literature, like any form of literature, is always also sort of a bit, or has always been. I don't know if I mean it's still sort of the thing. Like fantasy authors read other fantasy books and they engage with their writing. They engage with the writing that has come before, with the writing that is currently happening. And in that regard, Miebel and Vandermeer and Swanwick are definitely highly influential because other fantasy writers then read that stuff and they sort of like they're driving the genre forward, but that's not necessarily what then sells a lot. And you need kind of both, right? You need that kind of stuff to sort of keep people on their toes, keep people on the edge, and you need people who then sort of find ways to sort of turn those more like radical ideas into something that can actually sell enough for publishers to still keep actually publishing fantasy books. And it's sort of this weird thing that you have with that kind of, you know, the point where you actually need to sell literature and make it commercially viable. And that's sort of like where you have those two sort of facets to a genre, where you have like the inward facing side and the outward facing side. And someone like Brandon Sanderson is almost completely outward facing. Like Sanderson knows how to write books that sell, and I'll never take that away from him. He's always also aware of all the stuff that is happening within the genre. Like he's not stupid, right? So I would not be surprised if like Brandon Sanderson hadn't read like a bunch of China Mieville in his time, and maybe he takes some technique, something.
Well, I think there's also just a I don't want to say worldview. Well, maybe worldview. I don't know. I always try to take that into account because when I read a book, I'm actually hoping to make a video about this soon. But um, I feel like when you're reading, and this might sound a bit silly, but I feel like you're looking inside the author's psyche in a lot of ways, in a weird way, where you can kind of see what they think and how they feel about the world and all that fun stuff. So I
Yeah.
think there's also, I haven't read any Brandon Sanderson, but I have watched like his podcasts and stuff, and there's a sense when you watch him that he's kind of a I don't want to say cheerful guy. I don't know. Maybe. I mean, hey, if I had the biggest Kickstarter of all time, I'd be pretty happy about it. But he seems to have
No,
he seems to have a sort of, oh man, how do I describe it? I think just from the sense I've got the sense that Brandon isn't really into like grim dark stuff or like stuff that's macabre. Like I don't know if I would see him reading something like Perdido Street Station and enjoying it because like he might. I could be wrong. He if he ever
I
watches
think.
this, I bet he
I mean,
won't. But
from what I can tell, he's read some Malazan, so I think like yes, but like obviously we're not speculating on the person Brandon Sanderson, but like he does have a cheerful attitude. He's a way more upbeat, positive kind of person
yeah,
in
he
a lot
seems more
like in his
optimistic
presentation.
than like a
In the
Mieville or well, I don't know if Gaiman's pessimistic. I wouldn't call him pessimistic, but well, man, I could see him reading Gaiman actually. So we'll keep
no, but I think like Brandon Sanderson is a professional. Like he's a fantasy geek.
that's
He
true.
reads fantasy all over the place,
Or a Martin is what I
and
meant to say. Sorry, but continue what you were
and
saying.
and he's also like he's a professional. If you're a professional fantasy writer, you kind of need to know what's going on in the field. sort of. And I'm pretty sure that, I mean, obviously I can't bet on it, but I'm comfortably sure that Brandon Sanderson has read at least one China Miéville book in his life.
I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if he did. That's another one. I think Sanderson is very. I think he's very much a student of the genre as well. Maybe not in the same way that Gaiman is, but I think he knows well enough about it.
Yeah. But that's the point.
Especially,
It's like you can't be this successful without knowing stuff about the genre. That I mean, in general, like authors that are able to write good fantasy books or good books in general that have staying power, that stay around for a long time, usually have read a lot of stuff and are aware of the larger parts of the genre, because you need to kind of, you need to sort of, the convention of the genre, so you can like sort of play with them and turn them towards your own ends. And for that, you need to read, because otherwise you're not aware of the conventions. If all you've ever read is just Lord of the Rings, then the result is sort of Shannara.
or like Sword of Truth, God forbid.
I don't know how much. Yeah, well, no. Terry Goodkind has read more than one book. I'm pretty sure he read both Lord of the Rings and Atlas Shrugged.
I was about to say, I don't know that. I think that what's that first book called? That's how much I don't give a shit about the Sword of Truth.
It's called Wizard's First Rule.
Wizard's First Rule. Let me tell you right now, that is the most generic bullshit I have ever read in my life. And, well, without the psychic blowjob rape. But aside from that, like, might be some of the most generic fantasy bullshit I've ever read in my life. And
it's not good.
That's kind of my, like, when people are trying to tell me not to self-pub, I haven't made up my mind or anything like that. I'm like, look, Terry Goodkind and Dan Brown got published. I have no clue how they got published, but they did.
Well, Dan Brown does a lot of things very well. I think he's Dan Brown actually causes harm to society.
Terry Goodkind's just an asshole. He's not actively harming people. As far as I'm aware. I think he died a few years ago.
Terry Goodkind died a few years ago. I mean, obviously, he did some really terrible things when he talking about like his cover artists and whatnot. Like, but like, no. I think there's a difference. Like Dan Brown's books, I know why Dan Brown's books sold very well. I can very much explain why that is the case. I wish it wasn't the case. I think it's dangerous, but that's a different thing. I understand why it works. With Sword of Truth, I think it kind of sort of like hit that sweet spot where the first Wheel of Time got published and was sold way more than people were expecting. Dragon Bone Chair sold way more than people were expecting. So people, like publishers, were looking for more thick epic fantasy books, and epic fantasy being defined by dudes with swords and at least 1,000 pages. And there's these situations
but I think
where
the Sword of Truth is fucking lazy. I've only read the first book, but it's fucking lazy.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah, but that doesn't matter if you're running a publishing company and you're like, we need to put out books with dudes with swords because right now this is selling. You take whatever you can get, and you market it as this is a thick book with a dude with a sword. It's epic fantasy. It's sort of like Lord of the Rings, only different, and people will go and buy it because at the time, that's like late 80s, early 90s. It's like, where they're going to find out about it? Possibly in the bookstore where they just like buy the book because you don't have time to, read the whole thing. Or because they heard about it in like a print magazine, if they read print magazines. So like the way to be informed about the genre is way different at the time. And if you make your way through Eye of the World, Wizard's First Rule's not going to feel that bad. Right, so you're like, I want more, and it's the whole like, it's not heroin, but it may just still be methadone, right? You're sort of like taking whatever you can get because you want more. There's not like 1,000 different epic fantasy novels you can pick from in like the late 80s, early 90s. There's like 3. There's a lot of maybe 4 if you go, or 5. You're like, you got Lord of the Rings, you got Sword of Shannara. You got like Dragonbone Chair, you got Eye of the World. And once you've read all those four, what you're going to do? You pick Sword of Truth because it's the only one thing that's still around at the same time. And then over time, you build up your audience through that. That's like the advantage of having like a very specific form of marketing and a very specific form of communication, because all the reviews will be in those print magazines that people maybe buy when they feel like buying, I don't know, White Dwarf and Locus and the other one. Maybe Asimov is more like sci-fi, but you know what I mean. There's a couple of print magazines that talk about fantasy. You buy those, and there's reviews in there. And are those reviews paid for? Maybe not. But if your publisher goes like, "Oh, we have like a full page advertisement for Wizard's First Rule," in the same like issue of your magazine as the review for Wizard's First Rule, are you going to give that a book like a bad rating in that point? You're probably not going to do that, because at the end of the day, you want to sell magazines and you need advertisement for that. So there is a very specific way in which like large corporations, publications, publishing houses in books. It's the same thing for like music, for record labels in like the music genre. It's like you can control the flow of information, you can control marketing in a far clearer way than you can do now with like social media and the internet. So there's a lot of reasons why stuff like Sword of Truth got big in a way that it probably wouldn't if it were published today.
Well, now I do know why the Sword of Truth got published. I don't like it, but I know now.
Yeah, you don't have to like it. I think it's important to understand that it's like very much a result of a very specific point in time.
Oh man.
And the impulses of how a publishing industry works under in that system that we've built for ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, like, his prose style isn't like that bad. It's just, again, it's generic fantasy crap. I'm not interested in that. Unless there's like
Um,
I mean, I don't mind Tolkien or Howard inspired stories. I mean, there's stuff like Game of Thrones or The First Law that I think really plays with those models in an interesting way. And there might be some people who are like, oh, what about Thomas Covenant? Or, blah, blah, blah. I haven't read any of those, so I don't know.
Thomas Covenant
Or
is a very
Elway.
specific deconstruction of Lord of the Rings, and I like it for what it does. It's not going to be the most popular read ever, because it does some things very well, and those are very uncomfortable things. And in other regards, it kind of fails. I wouldn't say it fails, but I'll say this: the prose style is very purple in a way that tries to sound Tolkien-esque, but doesn't quite manage it in the First Chronicles, which may just be, the result of Stephen Donaldson not being, having been like a professor for like 30, 40 years before starting to write books, and not being very English and so forth, and just like trying to sort of imitate the sound of Tolkien's language without fully understanding when it works and when it doesn't work. So the prose can be a bit tough to get through. And then it talks about, a lot of like very dark topics and a lot of like self-loathing and overcoming sort of like self-isolation and stuff like that. It's not an easy read. It's very much deliberately not an easy read, but it's very, very much a good book in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, I just haven't read it. It sounds a little bit like, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe someday. I mean, again, it's one of those like, as a fantasy fan, I'd feel weird if I didn't read it. So maybe someday. But it doesn't. From what I've heard about it, it
Um,
doesn't sound like it would
I would, I
interest
would,
me all
I
that
would
much.
recommend reading Donaldson's essay on it. He's written like two of them, and one of sort of like
I've heard his essays are
evo-
interesting.
evolution from the other one. The essays, and they're relatively short, and he kind of tries to explain what he's doing, and I think that's well worth reading. And they're called like the epic fantasy necessary literature, and the other one is just called like epic fantasy, the literature of reintegration, I think. They're on his website. They're really good, and I highly recommend reading that one, especially the second one, which even mentions the Malazan Book of the Fallen. um, but I think
Yeah, isn't
they're
he a
good
fan of that
because
series? I think I remember seeing him like talk very. I've seen him talk highly about it.
both directions. I think Stephen Erickson is a fan of Stephen Donaldson, and the other way around. I think they have similar approaches in that they are sort of like very deliberately sort of deconstructing certain aspects and moving forward certain aspects of what they think fantasy is. And I think in that way they have a similar approach, like a more more structural, or well, deconstructing is still like a structural approach, like very much a structural approach to what fantasy is. They're not going like, hey, I'm going to tell this really cool story. They're more like, here's the fantasy genre, I want to do these things, and I'm gonna go and take all my tools, and then I'm going to deconstruct and reconstruct and rebuild fantasy to my personal views. And that's a different approach from like a storytelling approach where someone has like just like an idea for a really cool story. I'm not saying that like Stephen Erickson doesn't have a cool story in mind when he writes a book. That's not the point, but the idea is way more more structured, I think. And that's sort of something that you can see with Donaldson. It's more deliberate in that regard, in the same way that like China Mieville is very deliberate in like how he uses like his knowledge of the fantasy genre to do something very specific with it, sort of. I think.
Yeah, no, and that's another thing that frustrated me and really inspired me with the fantasy being an identity crisis is, I'm thinking one of these days I'm gonna make one of those like spicy rant videos like you make, where you get all pissed off at somebody like saying something stupid, and then I'm going on a tangent. One of the reasons I got kind of I wanted to make that fantasy identity crisis video is like not only do I see people just kind of, I don't want to say imitating. There are some people who do it, imitating that kind of Tolkien and Howard model. I mean, they're different models, but they're the two main models that we know. And but then there's people who think like it started with like George R. R. Martin or Joe Abercrombie, and it just kind of drives me crazy. I'm just like they're responding to them like God.
I think like the main thing with like obviously whenever you write something, you kind of respond. You have inspirations and stuff like that. I think like the main
Well, of
core that
course,
makes
yeah.
both.
I don't want to say. I said in the video, I'm not saying don't be inspired by them. Be inspired by them. They're very important
Yeah,
to the genre. But I also get frustrated when it seems to
yeah,
me that there are people who don't understand, like you know,
mm,
the
yeah.
dialogue, I guess. Which maybe I'm trying to give people too much credit here, because I know not
Well,
everyone.
we know that J.R. Tolkien read Robert E. Howard Conan stories.
Yeah, and apparently he liked them. So I mean, who
Yeah,
knows?
but I think like especially like when we talk about both Howard and Tolkien and why they have so much staying power and why they are still like sort of like inspiration. Both authors. And that's something that I see with Terry Pratchett and something that I see with Stephen Erickson. There's a bunch of others, but these authors, they have a very specific drive to write. There's a lot of like personal like need to not tell a story, but like make a statement. Like Conan stories are, Robert E. Howard being an existentialist incel in Texas, and Tolkien stories are very much about someone being incredibly depressed about both, World War One and the general like way that technology seems to destroy the world. And Terry Pratchett books are very much stories about someone who came up from poverty and is pissed off by the way that being aristocracy kind of gives you extra rights that other people don't have just because you're rich. And there's there's an underlying I don't want to call it ideology, like an underlying worldview, underlying belief that kind of drives this or informs the story, and that sort of like underlying need to write, to talk to the world, to change the world, to do something, I think is what makes Lord of the Rings stay. But what makes Conan influential, because Conan is not just about a guy in a loincloth killing people and having women swoon. There's an underlying thing that makes Howard write that story in the same way that you have that with Conan, with Tolkien and Lord of the Rings. I think
Or
most
even
authors
Liber, he
have that.
fought for the
Hmm?
Grey Mouser.
Yeah, Yeah, I think like most authors have that obviously because yeah, look, your worldview will always inform the way you write stories, but there's some authors where that sort of kind of comes through stronger. That need to do something. I think it's something you can see with Erickson, with Pratchett. Like these people write stories because they want to change the world, and obviously we all want to change the world. I think to some degree. Um, I guess we all want to make the world a better place because most of us would agree that the world is not exactly perfect, right? So we want to make the world a better place. We may disagree on what makes the world a better place, but we want to change it. And there's all kinds of ways of doing that. And there's some people that have realized that for them the only way to make the world a better place is by writing books to change minds. And yeah, that's people like Stephen Erickson who goes like, well, we need to talk about empathy and compassion, which is the underlying theme of the Malazan Book of the Fallen. We need to make, yeah, we need to do that. And there's Terry Pratchett, whose underlying thing is injustice, class injustice, gender injustice, that kind of stuff drives Terry Pratchett crazy. There's Tolkien, who's more about like, let's hold back on the technology, make sure that we kind of reduce the trauma of people in wars that are made up by technology. Progress should not be a means in itself. That's sort of like a Tolkien thing. And then you have like the existentialist sort of like thing that drives how. But these people are very much driven.
Individualism.
Hmm?
I would say individualism as well
There's
for
there's an
coming in.
individualism in there, very much an individualism, but it's like a very Nietzsche and early like French existentialist kind of influenced individualism. But like, yeah, but these people are driven by the need to make the world a better place, and that I think gives them sort of like an intensity. And there's an intensity to Tolkien. There's definitely a lot of intensity to Robert E. Howard, right? There's like you can't read something like Red Nails and not feel like the rage of Robert E. Howard at the world net itself.
Mm.
It's in there, and I think that's something that a lot of these authors have, and Pratchett certainly has that. I think the Malazan Book of the Fallen does have that as well. There's others as obviously like when you move towards like the more sci-fi end of things, like people like Cameron Hurley have that a lot. Like holy shit, that woman is angry. I like it. Don't get me wrong; it's absolutely brilliant. But N.K. Jemisin is someone who's also very much driven by rage against the injustices of the world, and I think that makes for good writing because it kind of gives the whole thing more like weight behind it, more gravitas, I guess, maybe. You know what I mean, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
That's always when I think about things like who's some of the best. I always think of the or as I like to call it, and this might just be whatever. I like to think of the singularity of their vision in that
yeah,
sense, where when you read that book, you go, okay, that person wrote this. It might be inspired by other things.
yeah,
That's because we're all inspired by things, but
yeah.
only that person could have written. Like when I read a Robert E. Howard story, I know Robert E. Howard wrote that. Or
Yeah,
when I
which
read,
which is which is why Robert Jordan can't replicate Robert Conan stories when he writes the Conan pastiches. They
or
don't work because Robert Jordan is not Robert E. Howard. Robert Jordan doesn't get it. He takes sort of like the surface details, like Conan is strong. Conan kills people. All women swoon for Conan. And then because he's Robert Jordan,
thud and
all he
blunder,
had is like the
as
spanking
Paul
scene.
Anderson would call it.
What?
Thud and blunder, as Paul Anderson would call it.
Yeah. That's a very apt description. Paul Anderson is one of those really like sadly underrated authors.
Yeah, no, I actually have the Broken Sword up here. I hope to read it at some point.
It's really good. I like it. The other one that I highly recommend is Three Hearts and Three Lions. It's also really good.
But going back to my point, like when I read a Mieville book,
Yeah,
I can look at it and be like, okay, China Mieville wrote that. Like
yeah.
yeah, I always take that into consideration.
Well, yeah. That's Marxist fantasy for you.
Well, yeah. Oh man, yeah. Marx is. Oh man, or Cormac McCarthy. I'll read a McCarthy book and I'll be like, yeah, he's the only person who could have written that and gotten away
Yeah,
with it.
they have very specific, like unique voices in a lot of ways. And it's, once again, something that like Neil Gaiman has. Neil Gaiman has a very specific voice. You can tell it's a Neil Gaiman book after a couple of sentences.
I guess I like authors with specific voices. Like, how's
Yeah.
that? How's that? Is that good?
Yeah. I mean,
Is that a good way to
technically,
describe it?
I would say that, for example, Joe Abercrombie has that as well. I mean, not the hugest Joe Abercrombie fan, but Joe Abercrombie has a very specific, very terse,
I was going to
sort
mention
of.
Joe Abercrombie. Yeah.
Yeah, Abercrombie does have that in a very specific way.
Or
Terry
George
Pratchett
R.
obviously also had that.
Or I mean, I might even say George R. R. Martin, but like, I just maybe I don't
I'm
know.
not so sure about Martin, but that may be because a lot of people have sort of like copied Martin's style that I'm not quite sure I would recognize a for George R. Martin, it's not so much the actual voice, I think. For George R. Martin, it's the way of building chapters and scenes that was like very much like a new thing at the time that has like obviously like influenced fantasy in incredible ways, right? The whole idea of like having different viewpoint characters, just having the viewpoint character as title for the chapter, and having each chapter sort of constructed like a TV scene. I mean, you can tell that Martin worked in TV and television in like the 80s. The way he writes is very, very sort of visual, and the way he constructs scenes and chapters is very TV influenced in a lot of ways. Where you have every chapter ends on a cliffhanger. The way they are built up, they are like very TV oriented, which I think one of the reasons why it was so successful, because a lot of people that maybe hadn't read a lot of fantasy before could sort of access the book through their experience of having watched like episodic TV, like TV series from the 1980s and 1990s, because it's a very specific language that he uses, and that's sort of like the big thing that that Martin brought to television.
Or
And
Philip K.
Abercrombie
Dick,
kind of
even.
updated. Hmm?
Going back to the singular voice thing, Philip K. Dick.
Yeah.
No one.
Oh yeah.
You read a Philip K.
Yeah,
Dick book,
Dick,
you're
of
like, yeah,
course.
he wrote that. PKD wrote that. Like, you can't.
Yeah. Very much. I mean, definitely Gene Wolfe has that as well going for him. Like Gene Wolfe is like stories that start with a first person narrator that tells you that he's telling you the truth, and after like 2 pages that he's already contradicted himself twice. That's a Gene Wolfe book.
Yeah, no,
Always.
I have a weird thing with first person and fantasy. Like, for some reason,
Yeah.
it's just kind of like, it's just weird. Like, I don't know what it is.
Mhm.
Like, there are first person narration books that I like The Great Gatsby. Love that book.
Yeah.
It's a first person narration.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's just something about it. I can't really,
think
for some reason, I can't gel with it. But
I mean, I don't know if you've ever tried to read Gene Wolfe, but he does that like in almost all his books, or like the bigger ones. A lot of them are just
I
like
read The
first
Land
person
Across.
narrative.
I didn't really.
Yeah, but
I didn't take
you know
to
what I
that
mean.
one.
It's a first person narrative by a guy who tells you that he's going to tell you the truth, and then he's going to tell you all kinds of weird shit that contradicts itself.
I read American Gods. I'm like, damn, that was great. And then I read
Yeah.
The Land Across. I'm like, what the hell is this?
I like the
fucking
Land
weird.
Across. It's definitely not
There's
like
a muddy
Wolfe's.
hand. There's a weird hand running around killing people. I'm like, what
Yeah.
the fuck is this?
I think like the Land Across is definitely not Gene Wolfe's strongest book.
I do
But
like the
it
Wizard
does.
Knight. The Wizard Knight looks fun.
The Wizard Knight is really cool. If you like your weird Norse mythology meets Arthurian legends
Norse, I'm in.
crossover
Like-
thing, it's really cool. It's got a talking dog and a talking cat, and they hate each other.
I do like Norse mythology, so you've sold me.
It's Norse mythology with
I've warmed up
a
to
dash of
Arthurian
Arthurian.
myth. I used to say no, but there's some Arthurian mythology inspired stuff. I'm like, you know what? It's growing on me. It's growing.
It really depends on what people do with it. You can do crazy good stuff with Arthurian legends. You can also do like really boring shit with it. I mean, obviously, I'm not an expert on Arthurian literature, but there is definitely good stuff in
made
the
a
Arthurian
whopping
corpus.
4-hour video about it. I haven't watched it because I'm like, oh my god. But well, I have watched Wendigoon's 5-hour video about Blood Meridian, so I guess I'm not incapable of doing it. But I don't have as much of
Yeah,
a vested interest in Arthurian legend as I do in Blood Meridian. So
yeah.
there you go.
I mean, I think like no, there's good stuff to be had in Arthurian
Well,
literature for sure.
I've heard Lavi
But
Tihar's or Tidhar's. I've heard his
Tidor,
Arthurian. I've heard his Arthurian's pretty good. I think Liam liked it.
who didn't like it?
No, I think Liam liked it a lot.
Liam liked it. Yeah, I love it. It's um, by force alone is a very very unique Arthurian approach. It's a very angry Arthurian deconstruction. It's really good. I like it. It's really fun. It does have a certain level of meta in it, a lot of meta, to be fair.
Okay.
Um, like the way he retells Arthurian stories, and like his Arthurian research is on point, right? Like the sources are correct. But he does use like very different like genre lenses to different stuff. And it's like he turns the Grail Quest is very much an homage to Roadside Picnic, or well Stalker, as most people in the West kind of know it, right?
Mm-hmm.
For example, and he has like the Arthur's youth in London, in Londinium, growing up as a ward of Sir Ector, and because all the way until he takes the sword out of the stone, is very much like a young gangster kind of story with like different gangs selling drugs and stuff like that. It's all over the place. It does all these different like genre switches and stuff like that, which gives you very specific perspectives on Arthur. It's also constantly incredibly disrespectful to the idea of Arthurian legend being like in any way, you know, something to be respected. I think that's kind of the core behind it. It's like this is sort of like
Wait, I
constitutionally
thought
part of
Tihar
like the
was I thought Tihar was Israeli.
he is he's Israeli born. He lives in London, and he was teaching literature at some college, like some university in London. I don't know which one, and he had to teach a literature a class on Arthurian literature, and that made him very angry. And then he wrote this book about like all the stuff. It's very much about looking at the idea that like Arthurian legend is sort of a core part of British national identity, and kind of taking that apart because it's certainly used
Well,
to
that's
sort of
kind of why
like
I was never
justify.
attracted to it because it's like I always felt it was kind of over romanticized, you know. like,
Yeah.
like I
Oh,
like romanticism, but like when it's like overly like, oh man, like
there's
it's
very
like
little
ooh.
romanticism in there's very little romantic in By Force Alone. I can tell you that. It's
That's why I like Norse mythology. It's all sad and you can't change fate, and there's people
yeah.
beating each other up with magic hammers, and there's a guy who hangs himself and then gives his eye up for knowledge. Like that shit's like that's great. Like, I love
Yeah,
it.
certainly not the worst. But yeah, By Force Alone is a really fun book, and it's kind of like a second one on the Robin Hood legends, which is called The Hood. Um,
They're not a bunch of prima donnas like the Greek gods are. Like oh my god.
there's interesting stuff to be had in Greek mythology. I'm
Oh no,
just
there's some
saying.
good stuff in Greek mythology, but like the gods are just oh my god. By
No,
Zeus.
no, you can do really good stuff with Greek mythology.
By Chrome.
I No, like I mean, Greek tragedies is like that's the things. Like a lot of like the really interesting stuff with Greek mythology has been done back then. When you look at like your Aeschylus and Sophocles and so forth, like the tragedies, right? The way they kind of like deconstruct and reconstruct and so forth, like Greek mythology in these tragedies. That's already pretty fucking rough. And that's kind of the point that kind of gets lost with like a lot of like the more like modern Greek myth retellings. Like we, we've had a lot of this stuff already.
Yeah, no.
Here's the thing though, like the really fun part with La Vitita, why By Force Alone is so good. It starts with like a couple of quotes. One by I keep forgetting. Um, it might have been what's his name? I can't remember right now. Um, the Irish writer with of A Modest Proposal, and I just can't remember the name right now.
Oscar
Uh,
Wilde?
no, the Gulliver's Travels guy,
Oh, Jonathan Swift.
Jonathan Swift. Yeah, it's a Jonathan Swift quote, and that's the first one. And then the second one is like, "Fuck him if they can't take a joke," which is attributed to Aristophanes of Athens.
So wow, I'm looking this guy up on Wikipedia, right? Excuse me. Dude's got citizenship to Israel, South Africa, and the United Kingdom.
Yeah,
Ridiculous.
he's he's been around.
Wrote a book called Osama. Okay. Wow. So yeah. So this guy's been around for a while. I didn't hear of him till it was one of those things kind of like Janny Wirtz. Like I hadn't heard of him until,
Yeah,
you, Liam, and a friend of mine on Goodreads. His name's Alan. Was telling me about it,
yeah.
and I'm like, all right, maybe I'll try him out. See how he goes.
He's certainly always pushing the envelope in whatever he does.
I do like the sound of that.
Trust me. Like, yeah, Osama is definitely well. It's a very interesting book about a bunch of pulp novels called Osama bin Laden, Freedom Fighter,
Oh my god.
and
Oh no.
someone having to track down the author of those books, and then stuff happens. It's a much more serious book than that concept might lead you to believe, but
Oh,
it's
I thought
certainly
from the sounds of it, it sounds like a satirical novel or something.
no. It's a very sad, melancholy novel about grief and stuff. It goes unexpected directions. I think that's like the main thing about La Vitita is that it goes unexpected directions. Usually, always. Like the second one, like Violent Century, is a novel about British superheroes fighting German superheroes in World War II.
I do. I mean, as weird as it is reading about superheroes in prose. I mean, I did read Joe's Wistful Ascending, which was
Yeah,
very good, by the way.
yeah, I
So
like it.
I'm not against it.
No,
Put it that way.
no. So that's that one, and
I
then
need
he
to ask
has
him for a Return of the Griffin, though. I hope I can get some more free books out of Joe. He's always very generous. He's very generous.
yeah, yeah. And then he has a book called A Man Lies Dreaming, which is very much about Adolf Hitler being a private detective in 1930s England.
Okay. His
Trust me,
ideas are interesting. His concepts are
that book
interesting.
goes some very, very, very dark places. I'm not going to spoil it here. It's a very, very dark book, though.
Is he still like anti-Semitic jerk ass Hitler? Is he like is this like a
Oh
Hitler who's
yeah,
like or is it
of course.
or is it a spoiler to ask?
No. He's still very much Hitler.
But he's a private detective.
Yeah, because he kind of lost, got pushed out by a coup in like 1934, and then he fled to London. Now he's working as a private detective, and you can watch the Mosley fascists take over England instead, because Germany now is no longer the fascist country in Europe.
All right.
And that's just the beginning, trust me.
Oh man.
There's more. And
Oh
he's done
man.
like, I think TDR has done like a lot of like really weird and different stuff all over the place. Yeah, it's certainly not for everyone, but yeah.
I know that Liam really liked what was that? Central Station?
Central Station is yeah, it's Central Station is really interesting. It's sort of like a fix up, like of a bunch of short stories, all set in the spaceport in Tel Aviv, which is
I like the
it's
sound
sort
of
of
it.
like it's sort of like slice of life cyberpunk set in a future Tel Aviv. In the
I like the
Yeah,
sound of that for sure. I definitely would like to read that at some point.
he's got like this like sort of like larger fictional universe. Central Station set in that. A lot of different
Why is he
sort
so
of
interested
shorts.
in Adolf Hitler? He has a comic called Adolf Hitler's I Dream of Ants. Like, come on.
Well, he's got a fantastic short film based on a short story that you can watch on YouTube, which is called "It Happened in Loontown." if you want to see a noir detective tale about balloons.
Sounds really weird.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, it
no,
kind
it's
of kind of makes me think of like Michael Chabon, don't know.
Shabon, yeah.
Where he writes a lot of these kind of not meta, but he writes a lot of these like very in the know type of books.
Yeah, yeah, true.
Very playful.
Yeah, I think there's different approaches there, but like certainly they deal with sometimes with like similar matters, I would say. Well, man, we've been going for like 2 hours.
Oh yeah, it's yeah, we usually have good conversations when we hang out.
Yeah, well, I'm approaching midnight.
Burn. So wow, he's literally called Wolf in the book. That's
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah, it's a I highly recommend the book. It's a really good book. It's also a very, very specific kind of book. You should not be easily offended, and you should be able to really take the darkness because there's some really rough patches in there.
All right. Yeah. All right. Well, yeah. But it's fun as always, Raf. It's nice.
Yeah,
It's nice having you on.
yeah, man, I enjoy it.
If you have any social media, as I like to do
Well,
before these are
I have a
over.
YouTube channel called Raf Blutaxt, and I think that's it
Yeah. All right. I mean,
mostly.
you have Twitter and stuff, but you don't use any of that.
I rarely use it, and it's all like linked in like the descriptions of all the videos. So I think, yeah,
But yeah. Well, I guess I'll give me a drink. But yeah, thanks, Raph, for coming on again,
yeah,
and we should do this again.
yeah.
And I'm sure there are other. Well, I do know there are other collaborations I'd like to do with you in the future.
I'm always
But
happy to talk to you, man. It's always fun talking to you. That's the point.
thanks, man. I appreciate
Yeah.
hearing that. Sometimes I
Yeah.
get worried. But
No, no,
it's.
no,
But
no. I'm always happy talking to you. It's always fun.
all right. Well, I hope everyone enjoyed this, and until next time.
Cheers.
Oh, hold on.